The rain over Boston fell like the sky was trying to wash away its sins. Heavy drops drummed against the hospital windows in a steady rhythm, like the weary heartbeat of a city that never truly slept. Inside Boston General Hospital, the hallway on the 7th floor gleamed a sterile white. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished tiles, and the familiar smell of antiseptic mixed with the chill of the air conditioner, thick enough to make breathing feel like an effort. Scarlet White pulled her mask down and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her rubber gloves were damp after 18 straight hours on duty. She had just finished stitching a deep wound on a car crash victim's arm. Her body trembled from exhaustion and hunger. Yet she smiled faintly when the patient whispered a thank you. 4 years working as a nurse at Boston General taught her how to smile even when running on empty. But tonight, when the clock on the wall blinked 2:35 a.m., she realized she no longer had the strength to fake it, Montenegro. No White. The night shift chief, Dr. Patel, called from the desk, his voice hoarse from too much coffee and too little sleep. Room 314. New transfer. Check his vitals, then you can clock out. Scarlet nodded faintly, taking the file from his hand. Her tired eyes skimmed the bold print: Anthony Jackson, male, 34, left shoulder trauma. Special observation. The name made her pause for a beat. Anthony Jackson? It sounded strangely familiar. She'd seen it somewhere before. Maybe in a finance magazine or on one of those glowing billboards downtown. She shrugged it off. Probably a coincidence. Jackson was as familiar as Smith in America. Adjusting the name tag on her chest, Scarlet took a deep breath and stepped into the dim corridor. The lights here flickered faintly, the air tighter, quieter, the only sound the rain tapping against the glass. Room 314 sat at the far end. Its door half closed, a sliver of yellow light spilling onto the floor. Scarlet knocked twice out of habit. No answer. She pushed gently, and in that instant she knew she had walked into the wrong room. But it was already too late to turn back. The room didn't look like any patient room she'd ever seen. In the middle of the night, 2 men in black suits stood on either side of the bed wearing sunglasses. Their posture was rigid protective. Not caretakers, bodyguards. On the bed, a man sat propped against the pillows, his left shoulder wrapped in clean white bandages. His face was sharp-edged, yet pale from blood loss. The dim light carved shadows across his jawline, catching on his steel-gray eyes. Scarlet froze. She had never seen eyes like that before, beautiful but dangerous, the kind that could pull you into an abyss if you stared too long. She tightened her grip on the folder. I'm the night nurse. I was told to check the patient in 314. The 2 men exchanged a glance but said nothing. One gave a slight nod. The door clicked shut behind her. The sound was soft, but sent a chill straight down her spine. The man on the bed tilted his head slightly. "You're not my nurse." His voice was deep low and laced with a faint Italian-American accent, each word sharp as a blade. Scarlet swallowed hard, trying to keep her tone steady. "I was assigned this room. If there's been a mistake, I can confirm with Dr. Patel." "No need," he interrupted smoothly, his voice flowing like dark wine. "Stay." 2 words simple but impossible to disobey. Scarlet opened the file to distract herself from the way her hands trembled. "You sustained an injury to your left shoulder, correct? I need to check the wound and your heart rate." He gave a half smile, one that never reached his eyes. "Do you always sound this serious when you talk?" She ignored the question and leaned closer to unwrap the bandages. The stitches beneath were precise, too perfect. Not the standard hospital suture pattern. The thread was foreign thin and surgical grade. Whoever had done it wasn't just skilled, they had access to materials ordinary doctors didn't. "This thread isn't hospital issued," she murmured. "Who treated you?" He arched an eyebrow, his gaze running over her face. "Someone I trust? A medical professional?" "Not exactly." Her pulse quickened. Instinct told her this man was anything but ordinary. She tried to focus. "The wound is healing well. I'll change the dressing and then Scarlet White." He said her name and her breath caught. "You know my name?" "From your tag," he said with a faint curve of his lips. "Though maybe I've heard it before." The words sliced through her composure. She took a step back, glancing toward the guards. They hadn't moved, but tension radiated off them. The air in the room felt suffocating. "You should rest," Scarlett said quickly, snapping the folder shut. "I'll no rush," he said softly. "Do you know why I was hurt?" "Car accident, according to the report. Reports exist to hide what people don't want to discuss." His eyes locked on hers. "Tell me, Scarlett, do you believe in reports? Or in intuition?" Her mouth went dry. She sensed he was leading her somewhere she didn't understand, into a conversation with invisible rules. Scarlett turned toward the door, intent on leaving, but one of the guards stepped in her way. "Sorry, Nurse White," he said flatly. "Mr. Jackson hasn't dismissed you yet." She froze. Mr. Jackson. The man on the bed gave a faint, knowing smile. "Anthony Jackson. Now you remember." For a split second, the world tilted. Scarlett recalled exactly where she'd seen that name on financial news headlines in Forbes 500, beside the title, "Chicago's Youngest Power Billionaire," the man who ran a financial and charity empire in his own name. But behind the glowing public image were whispers, rumors, linking that empire to something darker. Anthony Jackson was the man America both admired and feared. And she, Scarlett White, an overworked nurse on a night shift, was now locked in a room with him. She steadied her voice. "If you need anything, call Dr. Patel. I only handle regular patient monitoring." "I'm not a regular patient." Anthony leaned forward, the light catching the planes of his face. One bare shoulder, bronze skin beneath white bandages, the sinew of strength beneath the surface. He exuded danger and control, but what paralyzed her was his gaze, cold, fathomless, and hiding something lethal. Then, in a voice that felt like both a warning and an invitation, he said, "Tonight, Scarlett, you walked into the wrong room. But maybe it's the room fate meant you to find." Scarlett didn't sleep that night. She sat in the break room, trembling, her mind replaying the look in his eyes, the low rasp of his voice, and the suffocating sense that she had just stepped across a line between light and darkness. The next morning, as she left the hospital, the rain hadn't stopped. Wind swept through the maples, howling between the glass towers. She didn't notice the black car parked at the corner windows, fogged with condensation. Inside, a man sat motionless, cigarette burning between his fingers. His eyes followed her as she crossed the street. A voice crackled through his earpiece, "Follow her." Every move, every call. When Scarlett glanced back, she saw nothing but rain. Still, her heart clenched, a warning whispering that the storm in her life had only begun. And the man she'd met in room 314 would never leave her orbit again. When Scarlett returned to her tiny apartment that evening, a black envelope lay on the doormat. No address, no name. Inside was a single business card, Anthony Jackson. "For when you can't sleep." A phone number written in elegant fountain pen ink. Scarlett's hands shook as she stared at it. The shift should have ended everything. Yet deep down, a part of her didn't want it to end. Because in those storm-gray eyes, she had seen something haunting, a loneliness that mirrored her own. She didn't know it yet, but fate had already inscribed their names side by side as the Boston rain faded. A weary young nurse and a powerful billionaire stained by secrets, two worlds separated by 1,000 miles of sky about to collide, in ways neither could predict. A love born of mistake, bound by debt, and fated by truths too dangerous to be spoken. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. 3 days after that rain-soaked night, Boston still felt like winter. Damp wind blew off the Charles River, sweeping across the brick facades and iron balconies of old row houses. Inside a small cafe opposite the hospital, Scarlett White sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup, her eyes unfocused on the tide of people outside. She had worked at Boston General for 4 years, watched hundreds of faces come and go, but none had unsettled her like Anthony Jackson did. His name echoed in her mind like a voice carried by fog, both foreign and familiar. On the table, her phone buzzed an unknown number. Scarlett hesitated, then slid her thumb across the screen. A low male voice spilled into her ear. Velvet smooth but threaded with cold authority. Scarlett White. Her heart kicked. "Who is this Anthony Jackson? I trust you still remember me?" She would have known that voice anywhere, the same voice that had frozen her in room 314, now curled around her name like smoke. She drew a steadying breath. How did you get my number? I get everything I want, Scarlett. But today I only want to ask you one thing. What do you believe in second chances? Silence. The image of a black envelope on her doormat flickered across her mind. The card inside with the line, "For when you can't sleep," still haunted her. Breakfast, 8 a.m., Park Plaza Hotel. Let me buy you a cup of coffee. Consider it thanks for saving my life. You don't have to. It's not an invitation, Scarlett. It's a request. Before she could answer, the line went dead, leaving only the sound of her own heartbeat. 800 a.m. Park Plaza Hotel. She almost didn't go, but some invisible pull had her standing in front of the mirror, slipping on a white sweater, winding a light scarf around her throat. It's just coffee, she told herself. Nothing more. But she knew she was lying when she walked into the hotel lobby, flooded with pale gold light and the sound of a live piano. Anthony Jackson sat at a corner table near a window where the early sun fell through sheer curtains, shadowing his shoulders. A navy suit fit him flawlessly. A Patek Philippe glinted at his wrist. Dark hair combed back steel gray eyes, calm and deep, and a faint smile sharp enough to cut through composure. He rose when he saw her as if they were old acquaintances. I knew you'd come. You're very sure of yourself. Not sure. I understand people. He drew a chair for her, his gentle tone edged with command. Black coffee, no sugar. Am I right? Scarlett frowned. You investigated me? Anthony's smile didn't reach his eyes. Call it research. I never meet someone without knowing who they are. What do you know about me then? Scarlett White, 26, ICU nurse, born in Vermont. Your father was killed in a car accident, and your mother died when you were in high school. Younger sister is finishing her last year of nursing school, $47,000 in student loans. Scarlett's fingers tightened around the cup. You had no right. I have every right when it comes to someone I intend to protect. His voice dipped no longer extraordinary, but something heavier, not a threat but a declaration. She met his gaze. Protect me from who? From the people you're not supposed to meet. Like the two men who followed you last night. She froze. What are you talking about? A black SUV parked near your apartment at 11 p.m. Two Russian men, the same group that shot me on the Longfellow Bridge. They think you're connected. Connected to what? I'm just a nurse. Anthony leaned in, his voice a low murmur. No one is just anything once they step into my life, Scarlett. At that moment, she didn't know whether to fear or believe him. Something in his eyes, ruthless and lonely, at once made turning away impossible. The morning unfolded in fragments of conversation that felt casual but carried undercurrents. Anthony spoke of art investments and cities he'd lived in. His voice had a strange gravity, each sentence measured, polished, designed to intrigue but never reveal. He set his cup down by the end and his expression softened. You work yourself too hard, Scarlett. I saw your hospital record. You take more night shifts than anyone. Because I need the money. Need the money or running from something? The question lodged in her throat. He rose, slipping on his jacket. I'm looking for a private nurse. Full-time. It's nothing like hospital work, but the pay benefits and living conditions are much better. Scarlett gave a brittle laugh. You think I'd trust a man who once locked me in a hospital room with his bodyguards? Anthony bent close enough for her to catch the scent of wood-toned cologne laced with mint. No, Scarlett. I don't expect you to trust me. I only want you not to forget me. And then he left, leaving behind the ghost of his scent and words that wouldn't settle. That evening, a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside lay a contract and a handwritten note. 1 month, $50, $1,000. Free to leave at any time if you still want to. Anthony Jackson. Scarlett stared at the number until her heart stuttered. $50,000, nearly 2 years of her salary. At that moment, a text pinged from the bank. Your student loan has been paid in full. Her stomach dropped. Someone had cleared her debt, and she knew exactly who. She sank into the chair, her head spinning with questions. Why had he done this? She had met him only once. A man like Anthony Jackson didn't do things out of kindness. Was he buying her silence? The next day, she walked into Jackson Holdings, the glass tower dominating Chicago's financial district. Sunlight struck its surface into a blade of silver. At the reception desk, the woman merely smiled at her name and handed her a platinum guest badge. "Mr. Jackson is expecting you on the 50th floor." The elevator opened into a space of sheer glass and pale wood. The skyline spread like a frozen sea. The office was vast but spare, just a walnut desk and black and white photographs lining the walls. Anthony stood at the window, back to her. Light caught in his hair like a silver thread. "I knew you'd come." Scarlett folded her arms, masking her nerves. "Do you always assume that?" He turned, smiling faintly. "No, I prepare for every outcome. You paid off my debt." "Yes." "Why? Because I need you free. No chains, no distractions. You could hire any nurse. I don't need a nurse. I need you." His voice was quiet but rang through the room like a verdict. Scarlett's pulse jumped, not at the words themselves, but the look behind them. In his eyes lived something that defied logic, a tenderness so intense, it was dangerous. She drew a breath. "And if I refuse," Anthony stepped closer, stopping a pace away. "I won't force you. But since the night you walked into room 314, the people who want to hurt me wish to hurt you." Her mouth went dry. "They think you know what I'm holding. You can't slip back into your old life, they've already seen you. You're saying, I'm being watched. Not will be, am. Every step you take and the person you speak to is logged." Scarlett clutched her bag, the air thick around her. "You're threatening me." He shook his head, his expression gentling. "I'm warning you. You have two choices. Return to your small world and wait for them to find you, or step into mine where I can protect you. By locking me up like before, no Scarlett." His smile was faint, which drew you in, even as it made you want to run by keeping you beside me. That afternoon, she sat in the back of a black limousine, watching Boston's skyline slip away through tinted glass. Everything had happened too fast. She had signed the contract 1 month as Anthony Jackson's private nurse. The car wound along a lakeside road toward a gray stone estate hidden among trees. A small, poised Asian woman opened the door, calm face, compact frame. "Welcome, Miss White. I'm Mrs. Chen, Mr. Jackson's house manager. Please follow me." Inside the house was quietly opulent antique paintings, a low fire and soft golden lamps. Oak and coffee scents laced the air. "Mr. Jackson is in the library," Mrs. Chen said, and slipped away. Scarlett followed a long corridor to a carved wooden door etched with a phoenix. She knocked lightly. "Come in." His voice came from within. Low, rough, touched with warmth. The library soared, high sunlight pooling on the parquet floor. Anthony sat at a reading table, white shirt open at the throat, a glass of whiskey in hand. "You're here. Is this a good idea? Keeping a nurse in your house?" He set down the glass and walked toward her. "I'm not keeping you, Scarlett. I'm inviting you into my world." "And what is your world? A philanthropist billionaire in the press, and someone else entirely in the shadows?" Anthony was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly. "My world is a place where everyone must choose loyalty, or lose everything." She looked into his eyes, saw weariness, solitude, and something heartbreakingly human. "You don't need my loyalty," she whispered. "You need my trust." One eyebrow lifted, and then unexpectedly he smiled. A rare smile that melted the perpetual frost around him. "You're smarter than I thought." That night, in the room assigned to her, Scarlett opened the window overlooking the lake. Moonlight spilled across the water, mirroring the estate, a castle of light and secrets. From downstairs came the sound of a piano, Claire de Lune notes falling like rain. She leaned against the frame, her heart unsettled. In the drawing room below, Anthony Jackson sat at the grand piano, fingers moving with quiet grace. Light from the windows cut his face in half. One side shadow, one side glow, beautiful and unbearably sad. He didn't look up, but his voice carried soft enough for the wind to bring it to her. "You see, Scarlett, the dark isn't so frightening, not if someone stands in it with you." She closed her eyes, feeling her heartbeat trip. She knew in that instant she had stepped far beyond the safe lines of her old life. And somewhere inside the melancholy melody, she understood between light and shadow. Reason and desire, the border was fading, leaving only music and a heart trembling for the man in the shadows. The first morning at Anthony Jackson's lakeside estate unfolded in a stillness Scarlett had never known. Pale sunlight filtered through cream silk curtains, brushing softly across her face. The room she awoke in was 3 times the size of her Boston apartment, every detail curated with quiet precision. It was beautiful and unsettlingly silent, like she had stepped into someone else's dream. Sitting up, she noticed a vase of white lilies on the bedside table, her favorite flower. She had never told anyone that. Someone had known and chosen them deliberately. A gentle knock sounded. "Good morning, Miss White," came Mrs. Chen's calm voice. "Mr. Jackson invites you to breakfast on the West Terrace." Scarlett nodded, running her fingers through her hair before slipping into the beige silk dress on the armchair. As she walked down the long corridor, the faint hiss of the wind through the glass panes mingled with the distant cry of seagulls and the aroma of fresh Arabica coffee wafting from below. The West Terrace opened to a breathtaking view, Lake Michigan milk-colored, under a hazy morning sky wrapped in mist and silence. Anthony sat at a wooden table facing the water, reading a newspaper. Sunlight tracing the line of his wrist where a silver watch gleamed. For a moment, Scarlett stopped. Bathed in morning light, he looked nothing like the intimidating man from the hospital. There was something serene, almost fragile about him, like the image of peace she used to chase in her loneliest nights. "Good morning, Scarlett." His tone was softer than usual, though it still carried that unspoken edge that made her wary. "You're up early," she said, trying to sound casual. "I never sleep much. Bad habit of men who overthink." He folded the newspaper and looked up at her. "Sit down. We should talk about your work here." Scarlett sat opposite him, her hands still cold from the morning air. Anthony poured her coffee. The rising steam smelled faintly of chocolate and wood. "Your role isn't just as a nurse," he began evenly. "You'll monitor my health, keep private medical records, and oversee the medical wing here on the property. Everything stays confidential." Scarlett frowned. "How confidential are we talking?" "The kind where if you tell anyone, everything you've ever had disappears." The words were sharp as ice, but his eyes didn't match them. They carried not threat, but fatigue, the exhaustion of a man who had lost too much to trust easily. "You make it sound like you're a criminal," she said quietly, half teasing, half serious. "Maybe I am," he replied, a faint sardonic smile curving his lips. "Or I'm trying to keep order in a world that thrives on chaos." Scarlett said nothing. She couldn't decide whether she was sitting across from a savior in disguise or a devil wrapped in silk. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes laced with sorrow, arrogance, and loneliness, made it impossible to hate him. Breakfast passed in a strange kind of calm. When Mrs. Chen came to refill the coffee, Anthony spoke without looking up. Mrs. Chen prepared a separate room for Miss White in the medical wing. She'll need her own workspace. "Yes, sir," Mrs. Chen said with a polite bow before slipping away. Scarlett raised an eyebrow. "Do you always give orders like that?" "I don't give orders. I state what needs to be done. And if someone doesn't listen, then I make them want to." Scarlett couldn't help but chuckle. Spoken like a man who knows his power. "And you don't like power?" She hesitated. The question touched something she didn't want to examine. The strange truth that, though he frightened her, she felt safer in his presence than she'd been in months. That afternoon, Scarlett followed Mrs. Chen to the east basement where the medical wing was located. It was less a basement and more a private clinic, modern, spotless, complete with top-tier diagnostic machines, an automated lab system, and a cabinet stocked with imported pharmaceuticals worth more than a year of her hospital's budget. Scarlett let out a low whistle. He must really be afraid of dying. Mrs. Chen smiled faintly. "No, Miss White. Mr. Jackson isn't afraid of death. But many others are afraid of him staying alive." The answer sent a chill down Scarlett's spine. When Mrs. Chen left, Scarlett stood alone in the sterile glow of the room. Everything gleamed too perfect, too controlled. It felt less like a clinic than a sanctuary for secrets. She touched the cold steel table. Her silver bracelet clinked against it with a soft metallic ring. The sound echoed faintly hollow as the space around her. By late afternoon, Anthony had vanished from the estate. The staff said he had an urgent meeting in the city. Scarlett spent the rest of the day sorting medicine cabinets, organizing files, and double-checking supplies. The rain began at dusk. Chicago rain heavier and darker than Boston's. It felt as though it was trying to drown the entire city. She was writing notes when the lights flickered, then went out completely. The sudden silence pressed in like a held breath. "Mrs. Chen," she called softly. No answer. Seconds later, the emergency lights flicked on, casting the corridor in a sickly blue glow. And at the far end, she saw a tall, motionless figure watching her. Her pulse spiked. "Who's there?" The figure stepped forward into the dim light. Anthony. His shirt was soaked through rainwater dripping from his hair. The top buttons hung loose, and there was a faint streak of blood near his wrist. "God, are you hurt?" she blurted, rushing toward him. He shook his head, sinking into the nearest chair. "It's nothing, just a scratch." But the dark stain spreading through his sleeve told another story. Scarlett moved quickly, grabbing gauze and antiseptic, forcing her hands to stay steady. "What happened?" "A meeting," he muttered, voice hoarse. "One that didn't go as planned." Scarlett didn't push further. She'd learned that silence was sometimes a shield, but with him, it felt like a wall too thick to climb. As she cleaned the wound, Anthony's jaw tightened. Her hands brushed his skin warm and feverish. "You have quiet hands," he murmured suddenly. She looked up surprised. "Quiet hands? When you touch people, they stop being afraid. I saw it that night in the hospital." Scarlett froze. His words hung in the air, intimate and disarming, the line between duty and something far more fragile blurred dangerously. "You need rest," she said softly. "I'll bandage this and you should get some sleep." Anthony's lips curved into a weary smile. "You talk to me like you're the one giving orders. If I didn't, someone might die." "So you worry about me?" She tightened the bandage, avoiding his eyes. "I worry about all my patients. I don't want to be your patient, Scarlett." Her head snapped up, meeting his gaze, and the world went still for a second. Those eyes held not dominance, but longing. Not power, but hunger for connection, peace, and her. Anthony's fingers brushed her wrist light, deliberate. Her heartbeat stumbled. "If you're going to stay," he said quietly, "don't just heal me. Please give me a reason to live." Scarlett drew back, her breath shaky. "You're delirious. You have a fever." "Maybe." He leaned his head back, a faint smile touching his lips. "But some truths only come out when we're weak." The rain lasted all night. After treating him, Scarlett remained in the infirmary, unable to sleep. She sat by the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. Her thoughts circled back to him, the man behind too many masks. Everything in this place was strange, the silent guards, the coded phone calls, the locked doors. And yet, amid all of it, Anthony stood out as the most significant contradiction. Dangerous, but somehow the only thing that made her feel alive. She remembered how his hand had closed over hers, not in command, but in plea. There was a faint tremor in his voice when he said her name. The loneliness hidden behind power. She hated herself for thinking about him this much. At 3 a.m., the door creaked open. Anthony stepped in quietly, wearing a robe, his hair still damp. "You should be resting," she said gently. "I can't sleep." He stopped a few feet away, his voice low. "I'm not used to listening to the rain alone." Scarlett smiled faintly. "Neither am I." He came to stand beside her by the window. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence, mingling with their shallow breaths. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I was afraid of the dark when I was a boy. Then I learned to live in it. Now when the light comes, it hurts my eyes." "Because you've hidden there too long," she murmured. "Maybe, but for the first time in years, I think, I want to step out." She turned to him, and the look in his eyes, soft, unfocused, almost tender, made her forget how to breathe. She didn't know who moved first. She only knew the world stopped spinning when his lips brushed her cheek. She didn't pull away. The kiss wasn't possessive. It felt like gratitude, a fragile thank you from a man who'd forgotten how to speak it. "Sleep, Scarlett," he whispered. "I promise nothing will ever hurt you again." Then he walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of wood smoke and rain. By dawn, the storm had passed. Scarlett stood by the window, watching the first light spill across the lake. Everything seemed still too, but something had shifted inside her. A tremor of anticipation, a quiet fear, as if she'd crossed an invisible line. She didn't know that the man who had kissed her cheek last night, the powerful, enigmatic Anthony Jackson, was also guarding a secret that could destroy them both, and deep in the shadows of the basement corridor, a small red light blinked on a camera lens recording every moment. Someone other than Anthony was watching. And this was only the beginning. By the 5th day at Anthony Jackson's lakeside estate, Scarlett realized that this place existed apart from the rest of Chicago. A silent, sealed world where time seemed to stand still. No traffic, no voices. Only the stillness of cold air moving through endless halls. She woke early, brewed a cup of mint tea, and sat by the window, watching the pale light spill across the lake's surface. Everything looked peaceful, almost too quiet. But deep down, she knew something uneasy was growing inside her, a tension she couldn't name, a fragile thread between fear and fascination that tightened every time she heard his footsteps in the hallway. She told herself to keep her distance. But in this house, distance was almost impossible. That morning, Anthony wasn't at breakfast. Mrs. Chen said he had left early. Scarlett didn't ask where. She had learned quickly there were things in Anthony's world one wasn't allowed to know. She spent most of the morning organizing his medical records and preparing his prescriptions. Still, her eyes drifted toward the window, toward the winding path down to the lake where his black Bentley was usually parked. Near noon, the door opened quietly. Anthony walked in, sleeves rolled up shirt, slightly creased fatigue shadowing his features, but his eyes sharp and bright as ever. Working again, Scarlett looked up, startled. "Yes, I was reviewing your antibiotics. I don't need antibiotics. I need coffee." She frowned faintly but moved to the counter, preparing him a cup without a word. When she turned back, he was sitting casually on the examination table, relaxed, yet exuding a kind of power that made the room seem smaller. She handed him the cup, keeping her tone even. "You should rest. Your shoulder isn't fully healed." He took the coffee, a smile ghosting his lips. "I've never felt better." She sighed, setting down the medical file. "I'm not responsible for what happens if you don't follow the doctor's orders. I've never let anyone be responsible for me." The line was quiet, but it hit something deep. Scarlett looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she saw not just strength, but the exhaustion of someone who'd carried too much for too long. "You act like nothing can touch you," she said softly, "but I think you're just hiding something." Anthony arched a brow. And what would that be, loneliness? Silence filled the air. He set the cup down and slowly rose, closing the space between them. They stood just a few feet apart, and even that felt dangerously close. "Loneliness is a luxury, Scarlett," he said, voice low. "Men like me don't have time for it." "No one escapes it," she whispered. "Not even those who have everything." He stopped in front of her. The scent of cedar and rain clung to him, his presence almost tangible. His gaze held hers, and his voice softened. "You know, the first time I saw you in that hospital room, I thought I was seeing something I'd stopped believing existed." What was that peace? The words stole her breath. Scarlett didn't know what to say, reason slipped away under the weight of that look. The man who terrified her days ago now made her want to believe him. By afternoon, the sky turned gray with drizzle. Scarlett walked down the second-floor corridor to check the storage room. As she passed Anthony's study, she heard the faint melody of a piano drifting through the door. Chopin's nocturne, soft and mournful like a confession whispered in the dark. She paused, leaning against the doorframe. Through the narrow gap, she saw him, head bowed slightly, hair falling across his forehead, golden lamplight tracing his profile. He looked almost unreal for a moment, not the powerful billionaire the world feared, but a man caught somewhere between memory and silence. When the final note faded, she turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Come in, Scarlett." She froze. He hadn't turned around yet. Somehow he'd known she was there. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside, fingers brushing the edge of her skirt. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting. It's too quiet here." She glanced around the study, rows of dark shelves, thick files, and a few oil paintings breaking the monotony. One in particular caught her eye, a woman in a red dress standing beside a lake. "This painting," she murmured. "Who is she?" Anthony was silent for a few seconds. "My mother. She died when I was 15. "I'm sorry," Scarlett said softly. "I didn't know." "It's all right." His eyes lingered on the painting, their hardness melting for a moment. "She was the only person who ever believed I could be good." "And did you become the man she wanted you to be?" He gave a faint, sad smile. "No. I became what the world demanded of me." Scarlett said nothing. She understood that pain, the quiet kind that turned people into strangers to themselves. "You're different," he said after a pause. "You don't pretend. You don't hide what you feel. You think that she said meeting his gaze because you haven't seen everything." Anthony took a step closer. "Then, show me, Scarlett. Don't just heal people. Let someone see your wounds too." She stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't say things like that. I shouldn't have done anything I've done since the night I met you." The air grew thick electric. Outside, the rain deepened, and the silence between them grew heavier than words. Scarlett turned away first, forcing her voice steady. "You should rest. I have to finish checking your medication." He didn't stop her. He only watched as she left his expression unreadable, something between tenderness and regret. When the door closed, the nocturne began again, slower, sadder than before. That night, thunder rolled in the distance. Scarlett couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the black water of the lake, the faint light from the lower floor still glowing. She wondered why a man who had everything looked so utterly alone, and why she, who once feared him, now feared losing him more than she feared his presence. The door creaked open. Mrs. Chen stepped in quietly, carrying a tray, Miss White. "Mr. Jackson asked me to bring this to you." Scarlett looked up. "He's still awake." "He rarely sleeps before dawn." On the tray was a cup of warm milk and a small folded note tucked beside it. She waited until Mrs. Chen left before unfolding the paper. "Tomorrow, don't go anywhere. I want to show you something." No signature. She didn't need one. Scarlett closed the note slowly, her pulse quickening, half anticipation, half dread. The next morning dawned unusually clear. Anthony waited for her in the foyer, wearing a gray coat, his expression calm, but unreadable. "Come with me." She followed without question. The car wound along the lakeside road, then out toward the city's southern outskirts. The scenery shifted, the clean symmetry of wealth giving way to rows of small, weathered buildings. Finally, they stopped before an old, red brick structure, its roof streaked with rust. Anthony stepped out first, opening the door for her. "This used to be an orphanage." Scarlett blinked, surprised. "You grew up here for a while." He strolled fingers grazing the mossy wall. "After my mother died, my father sent me here. Said I needed to learn how ordinary people lived. He didn't realize this was where I learned not to trust anyone." She followed him down the empty corridor. The air smelled of dust and rain. Broken windows gaped like hollow eyes. "He said I used to sit right there pointing to a corner near the old window frame. I'd hear the other kids cry every night because they feared the dark. I didn't cry. I just listened. And one night I realized if you're not strong, the dark will swallow you whole." Scarlett's voice was gentle. "No one's born strong, Anthony. Some people just aren't allowed to be weak." He turned to her. "And which one are you?" She smiled faintly. "I'm the kind who isn't allowed to break. But sometimes, I wish someone would tell me I don't always have to be strong." Anthony's eyes lingered on her, the light from the cracked window falling across both their faces. Two souls from different worlds carrying wounds invisible to everyone else. "I don't even know what I'm doing anymore, Scarlett," he said quietly. "I know that ever since you walked into my life, everything I used to control is starting to fall apart. That's not a bad thing. For me, losing control has always been the worst thing." She tilted her head slightly. "Then you learned what happens when you stop fighting it." He smiled, a real one this time, soft and fleeting. And in that moment, standing amid the ghosts of his past, the wall between them began to crack. By the time they returned to the estate, the sun was setting. As Scarlett stepped out of the car, Anthony held the door open. "Scarlett." She turned back. "Thank you for staying." The words were simple, but his voice tightened her chest. There was no authority in it, no command, only honesty. She nodded, stepping inside. And when the door closed behind her, she knew her heart was no longer still. She was building a wall between reason and feeling, but every time he looked at her, another piece of that wall began to crumble. And she knew one day soon it would fall completely. That night, Rain returned to Chicago, heavy, relentless, as if trying to wash away every trace of the past. The sound against the tall glass windows of the Jackson estate was slow, steady, and haunting, like time itself dripping in the dark. Scarlett sat alone in the living room, a cup of tea, long gone cold, resting between her hands. The firelight flickered across her face, painting her gray-blue eyes in shades of amber and sorrow. Anthony hadn't come home. Mrs. Chen had only said, he had something important to care for. 3 words, something important that had become a curtain no one dared to draw aside. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Scarlett arrived at the mansion. She was no longer a stranger here. She knew every echo of footsteps in the hall, every faint scent of coffee and rain in the air, every silent glance exchanged between the household staff. But the longer she stayed, the more she realized something chilling. No one in this house was truly free. Not even her. Around 9 that night, the deep hum of an engine broke the silence. Scarlett rose instinctively, heart quickening, as headlights swept across the marble floor. Anthony walked in, rain-soaked, his coat clinging to his shoulders. A dark smear on his sleeve was a thin streak of red. Scarlett froze. "You're hurt." He shook his head, his voice rough. "It's not my blood." The air turned heavier. She stepped forward, catching his wrist to check for wounds. "Anthony, please let me look." He gently pulled back, his eyes softening, but his tone cold. "I'm fine, Scarlett." "Fine," she snapped. "You think I can't see the cut on your arm? Or am I supposed to pretend like everyone else here that nothing ever happens?" He said nothing. Rain pressed against the windows, muffling the silence between them. Finally, he exhaled, removed his coat, and tossed it onto the chair. "Come here." His voice was low, rough, and exhausted. Scarlett approached, opened the first aid kit, and cleaned the wound. When the antiseptic touched his skin, he flinched but didn't move. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "I don't know what you're involved in, Anthony, but if you keep living like this, you won't return one day." Anthony studied her in silence. His eyes, usually unreadable, flickered with something fragile. "Scarlett, there are things you're better off not knowing. Once you know, you'll never sleep peacefully again." She stopped, her hands trembling slightly. "So you expect me to keep pretending? To keep patching you up? Pretending not to see, ask, or breathe in this house, where even the air feels watched?" He didn't reply. Instead, he brushed her cheek lightly, a touch, both intimate and dangerous. "If I could, I'd let you leave. But you don't understand. From the moment you walked into that hospital room, everything changed. The whole world started watching us." Scarlett frowned. "What are you talking about?" Anthony didn't answer. With careful precision, he reached for her wrist and unclasped the thin silver bracelet she always wore. "Don't wear this again." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because it has a tracker inside." Scarlett froze. "What?" "The night you walked into the wrong room, you didn't just find me. You walked into my world and into the crosshairs of my enemies. From that moment, they wanted to know everything about you." Her heart hammered. "And you've known this the whole time since before you came here." The sound of her hand striking him cracked through the air. "Have you been watching me?" Her voice shook. He didn't flinch. "Protecting you." "Protecting?" She laughed bitterly. "Or controlling me? You helped me, yes, but that doesn't give you the right to make me a prisoner in your world." "My world doesn't allow innocence, Scarlett." "Then it's a miserable world," she said quietly, "because you've made everyone guilty." Anthony didn't move. His face darkened, whether with anger or pain she couldn't tell. At last he turned away, his voice barely a murmur. "If I told you that without me, you wouldn't still be alive, would you believe me?" Scarlett smiled through tears. "Maybe the fundamental mistake was ever believing you at all." She left him there, standing in the pale light of the fire, surrounded by silence. That night she couldn't sleep. The bracelet sat on her desk, once a charm her mother had given her, now nothing but a spy's device. She remembered Anthony's eyes when he said, "The world is watching us." There was no deceit in them, only despair. Near 3 a.m., restless and suffocating, she threw on a coat and slipped outside. The rain had stopped, but the ground was slick and reflective under a dull moonlight. She followed the stone path by the lake, breathing in the cold air that tasted for once like freedom. Someone was waiting at the bend of the trail under the oak tree. Anthony. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, his expression calm, almost as if he'd known she would come. "I'm sorry." 3 words simple, but they broke something inside her. Sorry for what, Anthony? For spying on me, for locking me inside your world, or for making me believe you were different. He stepped forward, moonlight cutting across his face, half shadow, half sorrow. "I am sorry for hurting you. I'd rather have you hate me than let them find you." Her voice trembled. "Who are they? The ones who want what you're carrying?" She shook her head confused. "I don't have anything anyone would want." Anthony's lips curved into a hollow smile. "Do you remember the patient in room 314? The one you thought was me?" Her eyes widened. "What do you mean that man wasn't me?" He carried classified documents, evidence from an international money laundering operation. He died that night. And I took his place before the police arrived. Scarlett stared at him in disbelief. "You're joking." "I don't joke about survival." Her world spun. Everything she'd believed that night, that mistake the guarded men. The fear in his eyes suddenly rearranged into a truth she didn't want to face. "When you walked into that room, you saw too much. My men saw you too. To keep you alive, I made a deal I'd protect you in exchange for their silence. You became part of the bargain." "Bargain?" she whispered. "I keep quiet. They stay away from you. But if you step beyond my reach, the deal dies." Her voice broke. "So I'm just a hostage?" Anthony stepped closer, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped her shoulders. "No, you're the one person I chose to protect. The one person I can't lose." Her breath hitched. "You sound like you love me." "Maybe I do," he said quietly. "That may be the only truth I have left." The words fell between them like rain on glass. Scarlett didn't know if they were a confession or a plea. "Love isn't possession, Anthony," she whispered. "And I can't love someone who makes me live in fear." She tried to pull away, but he caught her hand, desperate, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. I've lost too many people. I can't lose you, too." Her tears fell freely now. "You haven't lost me, Anthony. You just never really had me." She turned and walked away, leaving him under the oak tree, his shadow dissolving into the dark. The next morning, Anthony was gone. No one knew where. Mrs. Chen only said that he had left for urgent business. He'll return soon. But Scarlett didn't believe it. 2 days passed. She heard the sound of engines outside each night, hoping it was him, only to find emptiness again. The door burst open on the 3rd day as she sorted medicine in the infirmary. Anthony stood there, disheveled, exhausted, his shirt stained with dust, but his eyes burning with intensity. "Scarlett, you need to leave, now." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "They broke the deal. They know you ditched the bracelet. They're coming." Her heart raced. "What about you? I'll hold them off. There's a car waiting by the back gate. Don't stop for anything." She shook her head fiercely. "No, I won't leave you to face them alone." He seized her hands, his grip tight, urgent. "Scarlett, please, just this once, listen to me." Tears welled in her eyes. "And if I go, will you survive long enough for me to see you again?" He smiled faintly, tired but warm. "I've survived worse, but I've never been this afraid to lose someone." Her hand rose to his cheek, trembling. "If you die, Anthony, I'll never forgive myself. Then let me live by leaving." Scarlett nodded slowly, tears spilling down her face. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, a promise of farewell. "Trust me, Scarlett. When this is over, I'll find you." And then he was gone. Scarlett stood alone in the echoing room, listening to the door slam shut, knowing it might be the last sound she ever heard from him. Outside, the sky was a deep and broughton gray. The rain began again, soft, persistent. She ran through the back corridor out into the open yard. But a deafening explosion ripped through the air just as she reached the gate. The ground shook beneath her feet. She turned back. The mansion was engulfed in smoke. Anthony, her scream vanished into the storm. She saw only one thing through the haze and fire, a faint red glow fading from the second floor. Something inside her shattered. Part of her, the part that still believed love could redeem anything, died in that moment. Sirens wailed in the distance somewhere in the city's dark sprawl. But no one knew that inside the ruins of the Jackson estate, another secret still lay buried, one that hadn't yet been told. A week after the explosion at the Jackson estate, Chicago was drowning in rumors. The newspapers called it a gas leak. Others whispered of murder conspiracy or retribution. The police cordoned off the area, reporters were silenced, and everyone who had ever worked for Anthony Jackson vanished from the city as if they had never existed. Scarlett sat in a small rented room on the northern edge of town, her frail hands cupping a cold mug of coffee. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the explosion again, the roar, the heat against her face, and Anthony's last words, "Trust me." She had run just as he told her to, but running didn't mean escaping him. Anthony Jackson was dead, or so the world believed. But in Scarlett's heart, he was still alive, haunting her dreams, lingering in every echo of rain that fell against the window pane. 3 days after the explosion, a man appeared at her door. He was tall, sharp-featured, wearing a black leather jacket, his eyes cold and metallic gray, Scarlet white. She nodded cautiously, her fingers tightening around the lock. "Who are you?" "My name's David Myers. I worked for Anthony Jackson." Her breath caught. "Anthony, he's alive." David studied her for a moment before replying quietly. "His death wasn't an accident. But this isn't a safe place to talk. You're being watched." Scarlett's instincts screamed. "I don't believe you." David's gaze hardened. "You have a small scar behind your right ear, don't you? He told me that if anything ever happened, I'd find you. And if you didn't believe me, check the photo frame inside your black bag. The one you never opened." Scarlett's pulse quickened. She spun toward her old leather bag, the one she'd carried the night she fled the mansion. A small silver USB drive was tucked behind a picture of her late mother. When she looked up, David Myers was gone. That night, Scarlett plugged the USB into her aging laptop. A single video file appeared titled, "If you're watching this, it means I failed." The screen flickered. Then came his voice, rough, low, slightly distorted, but unmistakably his. "Scarlett, if you're seeing this, it means things didn't go the way I planned. Don't trust anyone. Not even those who claim to speak for me. They want what I hid, proof of a global money laundering network connected to governments and corporations." He paused, breathing raggedly. "You're the only one I trust. Because you don't belong to this world, which makes you unpredictable. Inside this drive is an encrypted password leading to the real data. But Scarlett, don't go there alone. If I'm alive, I'll find you." The screen went black. Scarlett sat in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Part of her wanted to believe he was still alive. Another part feared this was only a dying man's confession. However, one thing was sure, Anthony Jackson never left without a way back. 3 days later, she left Chicago. She traveled to New York City, following a trace from his past, a cafe on 47th Street he once mentioned. "They don't ask questions there," he had said. The cafe was small and dim, filled with the smell of roasted beans and faint cigarette smoke, and in the corner sat a man in a cap reading a newspaper. She almost turned to leave until he folded the paper down. His eyes met hers, blue-gray piercing, impossibly familiar. "Anthony." Scarlett froze. For a moment, the noise of the city, the clinking cups, the hum of life all faded. "Scarlett." She took a step back, trembling. "You're alive." He nodded slowly. "I promised I'd find you." The next second, she was in his arms, the world collapsing around them. His embrace was warm, solid, genuine. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I had to make them believe I was dead. It was the only way to keep you safe." Scarlett lifted her head, searching his face. "You staged the explosion." "Not entirely. They really came for me. But I had a backup plan. Her voice cracked. Do you know what it felt like thinking you were gone? I know, he whispered. His hand brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. I saw you running through the smoke. That was the first time in my life I was afraid not of dying, but of losing you. Her tears spilled freely. You're the cruelest man I've ever met. And the only one I can't forget. They hid in a small apartment near Central Park, living like ghosts. They had no bodyguards, shadows, or lies for the first time, only each other. Mornings were quiet. Scarlett cooked breakfast while Anthony made coffee. They sat by the window watching the city move beneath them like a film they no longer belonged to. For a few fragile days, the world stood still. Do you ever think he said one morning that we could start over somewhere no one knows our names? Scarlett smiled faintly. Where there's nowhere left that doesn't know the name Anthony Jackson. What if I change it? My face too, she blinked. You can't be serious. I am. I have the resources, a new identity, a passport, and a life. If you say yes, we leave tonight. Her heart wanted to say yes, but her conscience whispered no. Anthony, if you disappear again, who will answer for the people who died in that explosion? For the ones who didn't deserve any of this? He looked at her, his eyes shadowed. You still think like a nurse always trying to save everyone? And you, she said softly, only know how to decide who gets to live. The words struck deep. Anthony turned to the window, his voice heavy. Some people can only live if I disappear. You don't understand, Scarlett. Power doesn't cost money. It costs blood. She reached for his hand, her voice barely above a whisper. Then stop letting others bleed for you. He didn't answer. He just held her hand tighter as if afraid that letting go would make her vanish with the dawn. That afternoon, they walked through the park. Scarlett saw him smile for the first time in what felt like years, a genuine smile. He said that if there's another life, I'd want to meet you in a world without blood or bullets. Just a small cafe where you make coffee every morning. Scarlett laughed softly, though her heart ached. And what would you be, the customer who never misses a day, always sitting at the same table to see you smile? For a fleeting moment, she believed in peace. But peace with Anthony Jackson was always smoke beautiful, fragile, gone the moment you tried to hold it. That night, she heard a knock on the door. When she opened it, the hallway was empty. Only an unmarked envelope lay on the floor. Inside was a photo her and Anthony taken secretly in the park earlier that day. Underneath a message scrawled in black ink. No one hides forever. Scarlett's blood ran cold. Anthony emerged from the bedroom, saw her expression, and took the photo from her hand. His face darkened instantly. They've found us. They know I'm alive. What do we do? We can't stay. They'll come soon. I have to go first. Scarlett grabbed his hand, panic flooding her voice. No, you can't leave me again. He looked at her eyes hard but full of sorrow. If I stay, you'll die. They don't need me alive. They want you to punish me. Her tears fell. You said you loved me. Then don't go. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. It's because I love you that I have to. He went to the safe, pulled out a thick envelope and a minor brass key. There's a ticket to San Francisco. This key leads to a safe house. My people will meet you there. What about you? I'll end this, once and for all. She threw her arms around him, sobbing. If you walk away now, I won't wait again. Anthony smiled a soft, heartbreaking smile. You're a terrible liar, Scarlett White. At 2 a.m., she watched him leave. He turned back once their eyes meeting through the glass. In that look was everything love, regret, and the quiet resolve of a man walking toward his fate. Then he was gone. The street was empty. Only the sound of the wind remained. The next morning, Scarlett boarded a plane to San Francisco, clutching the key he'd given her. As the helicopter lifted, she looked down at Chicago, the city shrinking beneath the clouds, but his shadow grew larger in her heart. She wondered, was he still alive, or had he vanished again into the fire, leaving her with memories that would never burn out somewhere in a dimly lit room? Anthony Jackson ended a call and stared out over the waking city. Protect her at all costs, he said. A voice crackled back through the line. And you, sir? Anthony's gaze hardened. I still owe this world a confession. Then he stepped outside into the faint glow of dawn, walking toward whatever redemption or ruin awaited him between the ashes of his sins and the last breath of his love. Above the western sky, Scarlet closed her eyes. Unaware that the next time she opened them, her fate and Anthony Jackson's would intertwine one final time in a battle not between truth and lies, but between love and redemption. The foggy mornings of San Francisco always carried a certain melancholy, as if the city itself had been born to keep secrets. Scarlet stepped out of the airport with a single suitcase, her face pale after a sleepless night, and a flight that felt longer than it should. The minor metal key Anthony had given her in her coat pocket lay cold and heavy, like an unspoken fate waiting for her to face it. He had told her to come here. He had promised to end it all and come back. However, promises made by men like Anthony Jackson were never meant to be kept forever. The apartment was tucked into the hills of Telegraph Hill, overlooking the bay. When Scarlet turned the key, the door opened to the faint scent of mint and aged wood. On the table sat a white envelope, her name written in a hand she knew too well. If you're reading this, it means you're safe. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Scarlet, this apartment belongs to an old friend of mine, Dr. Richard Hale. If anything happens, he will help you. If you still trust me, don't try to find me. When I can, I'll come. Don't be afraid. Wherever I am, you are protected. Scarlet held the letter to her chest. She wanted to believe him. But belief was like the fog outside her window, beautiful from afar, yet it vanished with the first breath of reality. Days slipped by quietly in San Francisco. Scarlet found a temporary job at a small private clinic near the Mission District, where ordinary people came seeking a little hope in their complicated lives. Work gave her purpose, or at least a distraction. But when night fell, memories returned like tides against the pier. Every time she crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, the sunlight glimmering off the water reminded her of the man who had promised to leave the dark for her only to disappear into it again. One late afternoon, the door opened while sorting medications in the back room. Dr. Hale Kind Eye's silver hair stood at the threshold. Scarlet, you have a delivery. No name, no return address. She frowned slightly and accepted the small box. Inside lay a man's wristwatch, which Anthony used to wear, with a faint scratch along the rim. Beneath it was a folded note. Don't trust anyone close to you. They haven't stopped. No signature. But she didn't need one. Her blood ran cold. Dr. Hale noticed her expression. Is something wrong, my dear? No, she said quickly, forcing a smile. Just an old keepsake. But that night sleep refused to come. She sat by the window, the watch gleaming under the dim light. Something about it felt deliberate. She turned it over, fingers searching, until she found a tiny slit in the metal backplate. Inside was a microchip and a note no bigger than her thumb. Pier 39. Midnight. Scarlet's heart pounded. He was alive, and he was calling her. At midnight, she walked down the fog-drenched streets toward Pier 39. The tourist lights were long gone, the air thick with salt and silence. The sound of waves hitting the wooden posts echoed through the stillness. She moved carefully along the dock, eyes scanning every shadow. Scarlet. Her breath caught the voice, deep, rough, unforgettable. She turned. Anthony stood there, dressed in black face gaunt, but eyes burning with life. He was real. Alive! Scarlet's body moved before her mind could stop it. She ran into his arms. You're insane, Anthony. Do you have any idea how many times I thought you were dead? He held her tightly, his voice muffled against her hair. I know, but you wouldn't be standing here if I hadn't let them think I was. She pulled away, staring at him through tears. So what now? You run again? No. This time I came to finish it for real. From his coat pocket, he took out a small hard drive. Everything's here. Every name, every transfer, every deal I ever made. I'm giving it to the FBI. After that, Anthony Jackson ceases to exist. Her eyes widened. You're turning yourself in? Not surrendering, atoning. She grasped his hand, her voice trembling. You don't have to do this. We can disappear. Anywhere, New Zealand, Venice, some forgotten town. We can start over. He smiled faintly, a smile full of warmth and sadness. You still don't see it, do you? I lived my life in power, in lies and darkness. But when I met you, I wanted to be someone better. And the only way to do that is to give the truth back to the world I deceived. Tears streamed down her cheeks. If you do this, you'll lose everything. I already lost everything when you walked away. This is the only thing I can save my honor. He brushed her hair back, resting his forehead gently against hers. If I don't come back, don't look for me. Live, Scarlett. That's how I'll know I didn't die for nothing. Her voice broke. Anthony. He stepped back, his gaze steady. I love you, Scarlet White. And before she could speak, he turned, his silhouette swallowed by the fog, his footsteps fading into the whisper of the sea. 3 days later, the morning news lit up every screen in America. Billionaire Anthony Jackson appears in federal court with evidence exposing a multinational financial crime network. Federal agents confirm he voluntarily surrendered, providing full cooperation. Scarlett stood frozen in her apartment, tears blurring the screen. He was in a dark suit, wrists in cuffs, yet his eyes glowed defiantly. He didn't look broken. He looked free. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips and wept, proud, heartbroken, and utterly powerless. On the first day of the hearing, she couldn't bring herself to go, but she followed every report. Anthony told everything, names of executives, shell companies, and the hidden money trails. The press called him the traitor of the elite. To Scarlett, he was the bravest man she'd ever known. That night, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. If you want to see him one last time, come to the Golden Gate Bridge at 2 a.m. She knew it was a trap, but her heart no longer listened to reason. The wind was fierce on the Golden Gate Bridge, the fog thick enough to blur the lights. Scarlett stood alone beneath the vast emptiness of the night. Then a figure emerged through the mist. Tall, familiar, unmistakable. Anthony. No handcuffs, no guards, no fear. Just him in a gray coat walking toward her like a ghost from a dream. Anthony. He smiled softly. They gave me an hour of freedom before they moved me. You shouldn't be here, I know, but I had to see you. Scarlett's voice trembled. You've saved the world. But who's going to save you? He lifted a hand, brushing her cheek gently. You already did. They stood in silence, the wind roaring around them. The city slept beneath the fog, unaware that 2 lives were breaking quietly above its lights. Scarlett whispered, If you had a chance to do it all over again, would you choose differently? Anthony's eyes searched hers for a long moment. Then he shook his head. No, because any other path wouldn't have led me to you. And in that instant, she understood no matter how cruel fate had been, their love was the one honest thing that survived the lies. When the first light of dawn broke over the bay, Anthony turned to her, his voice low but steady. Be happy, Scarlett, for both of us. She nodded, unable to speak. He walked away slowly, deliberately, until the fog swallowed him whole. Scarlett stayed there long after he was gone, until the sun rose fully and the bridge came alive with traffic again. To the world, it was just another morning. To her, it was forever the morning she learned that love isn't always about holding on, but knowing when to let go with honor. Weeks later, Scarlett left San Francisco. She opened a small clinic in Southern California, where no one knew the name Anthony Jackson. But on her desk, there was always one photograph, a man standing on the Golden Gate Bridge facing the dawn. She never spoke of him, because some loves aren't meant to be explained, only remembered. And whenever the ocean breeze swept through her window, carrying the faint scent of salt and rain, she smiled softly and whispered, You kept your promise, Anthony. You truly stepped out of the dark. But somewhere under the crimson sunset of the Nevada desert, a convoy of black SUVs raced across the empty road. Inside, a man in handcuffs lifted his gaze toward the horizon. His eyes were still alight, fierce alive. We still owe each other an ending, Scarlett. And the vehicles disappeared into the distance, leaving behind a story still unfinished somewhere between love redemption and the fate that refused to let them go. 3 years had passed since Anthony Jackson was sentenced and vanished from the world of wealth and power. To the public, he was dead, another casualty of a prison altercation in a federal facility. Newspapers reported a quiet burial. No family attended. No flowers were placed, just a cold headstone that read Anthony J. Jackson, 1979 to 2026. But Scarlett never believed it. She still remembered that final look on the Golden Gate Bridge, the eyes of a man who would never accept that as his ending. Now, she lived in Carmel by the Sea, a small coastal town, where the Pacific wind always carried the taste of salt and memory. She had opened a modest clinic called Harris Care Clinic, taking her mother's surname, as if reclaiming her identity from everything lost. She brewed her coffee every morning and played Chopin's Nocturne, the same piece Anthony once played for her. It had become her quiet ritual of remembrance. Time had softened the ache, but it had not erased it. Some wounds, she had learned, were meant to stay, not to hurt, but to remind. The cherry blossoms bloomed along the town's main street that March. Scarlett walked toward the sea, her notebook in hand. She stopped suddenly in front of a small flower shop with a wooden sign that read, "The Last Bloom." She didn't know why she paused. Maybe it was the white rose in the porcelain pot by the door, the same kind Anthony used to keep in her room. The wind chimed softly as she pushed the door open. Behind the counter stood a man tall in his 40s, perhaps, with dark hair streaked with silver. Sunlight poured through the window outlining his profile. For one impossible heartbeat, Scarlett felt the world tilt. No, it couldn't be. "Hello," the man greeted, his voice low, gentle. "Looking for flowers." That voice almost identical. Scarlett froze, her voice trembling. "I'm just looking." "Not many strangers come here," he said with a faint smile. "But you have the eyes of someone who once loved flowers." She smiled weakly. "I knew someone who did." "But he's gone now." "Gone?" he asked quietly. "Where to?" "No one knows." Silence lingered between them. Then he removed his gloves and reached for the bouquet of white roses. "Would you like me to wrap one for you?" She nodded absently. And that's when she saw it. A faint crescent-shaped scar along his right wrist, exactly where she had once bandaged Anthony's wound that rainy night years ago. Her breath caught. "You..." Her voice broke. "Who are you?" The man paused, then lifted his gaze. His eyes, gray, deep luminous, under the fading light, met hers. "I'm the man who still owes you a goodbye." The world went still. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. In the golden quiet of dusk stood a woman trembling at the threshold, and a man who had walked through hell just to come home. They sat outside the shop, surrounded by pots of blooming roses. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and the sound of waves breaking against the cliffs. Scarlett couldn't speak for a long time. She looked at him, afraid that he might disappear if she blinked. "They said you were dead." Anthony smiled faintly. "So did I for a while." "What happened to you?" "Where did you go?" "After I turned in the evidence, they placed me under witness protection. New identity, erased records, a ghost in the system." To the world, Anthony Jackson died. But to the government, I was just a shadow they couldn't name. Scarlett's voice trembled. "How long did I search for you?" "I know," he said softly. "And I watched over you from a distance." She blinked in disbelief. "You watched me only to make sure you were safe." A tear rolled down her cheek. "You haven't changed, still hiding behind walls. Aren't you tired?" "Exhausted," he admitted. "But seeing you again, it was worth it." Scarlett laughed through her tears. "Do you know how I've lived, Anthony? I taught myself to stop hoping, to stop dreaming of you. Yet every morning I made coffee for two. I left the chair across from me empty." Anthony reached out his hand, trembling slightly as he took hers. "I'm sorry for making you wait this long." Her eyes glistened. "Are you going to leave again?" "No," he said firmly. "Not ever again." From that day on, Scarlett returned to the Last Bloom every evening. She helped him arrange flowers and listened to him tell stories about customers who came and went. He planted a garden behind the shop, all white roses. They would sit side by side at sunset, watching the sky turn crimson. Words weren't needed. Peace spoke louder than any confession could. But in Anthony's eyes, a quiet sadness still lingered, the kind of shadow that even years could not erase. One evening, she asked gently, "Do you regret any of it?" "What did you do?" Anthony looked out toward the horizon. "Regret? No. But sometimes I wonder, If I'd stayed silent, maybe I'd still be in Chicago. Rich, powerful, and alone. And I would never have met you. He smiled. No, you were destined to appear in my life one way or another. She leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "Then let me stay here. Don't let the world take you from me again." He kissed her hair softly. "The world has no claim on me anymore." That summer, the sea in Carmel was clear as glass. Tourists came and went. The flower shop bloomed with life. Scarlett often caught Anthony laughing with customers, a light, unguarded laugh she had never heard before. One evening, he called her out to the beach. The sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and amber. "Do you remember what I once said?" he asked. "If there were a next life, would I be a man who came to your cafe every morning to see you smile?" Scarlett smiled. And now Anthony took her hand, his eyes reflecting the vastness of the sea. "Now I don't want another life. I like this one with you." She froze. "Are you proposing to me?" He chuckled softly. "No, I apologize for not doing it sooner." Scarlett laughed through her tears. "You always know how to make me mad and melt simultaneously. It's the only way I know how to love you clumsily." She reached up, kissed him under the fading sun. The waves lapped around their feet, and the wind carried the scent of roses and salt. At that moment, time stood still. Two souls who had lost everything finally found peace in each other's arms. They never left Carmel after that. Anthony expanded the flower shop. Scarlett continued her clinic. To everyone else, they were simply Tony and Clara, the quiet couple by the sea. But the following winter, Anthony's cough worsened. He grew thinner, paler. Scarlett insisted on taking him to the hospital in Monterey. The diagnosis shattered her heart's severe lung damage from chemical exposure years before. He knew, and now so did she. "Scarlett," he said one fragile afternoon, "I might not have much time left." "Don't say that. You pulled me out of the darkness. Promise me you'll keep living long enough to tell someone that even a sinner once learned how to love." Tears streamed down her face. "You weren't a sinner, Anthony. You were just lost. And you were the one who found me." He smiled faintly. "If you can bury me in the garden where you can see me every morning." She nodded, unable to speak. On a soft spring morning, when the white roses bloomed, Anthony Jackson took his last breath in Scarlett's arms. He went quietly, lips curved in a peaceful smile. She laid him to rest beneath the rose garden he had tended, with hands once stained by blood and fire. The wind carried the scent of salt and flowers. Scarlett sat beside him, whispering toward the horizon. "You promised to live this life with me, and you kept your word." Years passed. Locals often spoke of a small flower shop in Carmel, run by a gentlewoman with silver hair and eyes the color of the sea. She placed a white rose by the shore every morning and sat for hours as if conversing with someone unseen. No one knew that inside her house lay an old notebook, its last page written in a man's careful hand. Love does not need forgiveness. It only asks to be believed that it once was real. On the final afternoon of that blooming season, the wind swept through the garden, carrying the scent of roses and salt. Scarlett looked up at the crimson sky, the same hue as the fire that had once torn their lives apart. A single white petal drifted into her palm, warm, almost alive. She smiled, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw him standing among the roses. His gentle smile, unchanged hand reaching out to her from another world. Anthony Jackson had finally stepped out of the dark. But the love between him and Scarlett, it never truly left. 10 years had passed since Anthony Jackson left this world. Yet Carmel by the Sea remained untouched by time, a town where the waves still beat the same rhythm, the wind still carried the salt of memory, and the white roses bloomed faithfully every spring, whispering secrets of a love the world had long forgotten. Scarlett, now nearing 50, had hair streaked with silver that shimmered under the sun like threads of memory. Her eyes, calm and kind, held the stillness of the sea after rain. The townspeople called her Dr. Harris, the woman with healing hands and a smile that soothed pain. None of them knew her past. They only knew that she brought a bouquet of white roses to the ocean each morning and stood there long as if waiting for someone who never returned. That morning, the wind blew stronger than usual. On the table in her living room, amid scattered medical charts and medicine bottles, a worn envelope slid through the crack under the door. There was no name, no sender. Scarlett paused. Over the years, she received many letters from patients, old friends, and people, and she had touched. But this one felt different. There was no stamp, no address, only a single line written in steady, familiar handwriting, for the one who never forgot. Her heart trembled. She opened it. Inside lay a faded sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo showed a man with silvered hair standing on a dune, the sunset burning behind him. The face was older, the lines deeper, but the eyes? Those eyes could never belong to anyone else. Anthony Jackson. Beneath the photo were a few lines written in his unmistakable hand, bold yet trembling slightly as if written in fever. If you are reading this, I have kept my promise never to let you be alone. I did not die that night. They hid me as they once hid the truth itself. But by the time this letter finds you, I may no longer walk upon this earth. Even if my body fades, my soul lingers where the sea wind meets the rose garden. Because my love for you has never ended. Scarlett sat still, her hands shaking as tears fell silently onto the page. 10 years. A decade of quiet existence mending others while her heart remained stitched with invisible scars. She had thought she had learned peace, but fate, as always, had its way of reopening doors she had long closed. That evening, Scarlett opened the small wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard that kept Anthony's relics, the silver watch, the encrypted USB drive, and the scrap of paper that read, "Love does not need forgiveness." Now she added the new letter beside them and smiled through tears. "You're still the most stubborn man in the world, Anthony." In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. A fresh bouquet of white roses appeared at her doorstep every morning, perfect, dewy, untouched. No one knew who brought them. She asked the local florist. No one claimed the delivery. Then one morning, a newspaper boy whispered to her, "I've seen a man miss, older with gray hair and a long coat. He stands at the corner before sunrise, always holding flowers." Scarlett's pulse quickened. "Did you see his face?" "Not clearly, but I remember his eyes, gray, very sad. Those gray eyes, no passage of time could erase their memory." That night, the rain returned a soft, steady rhythm, tapping against the glass, echoing that long-ago night in Chicago when they first met. Scarlett sat by the window, lost between dream and remembrance. Then came a faint knock. She rose slowly and opened the door. No one stood there. Only a bouquet of white roses lay on the wet doorstep, and beneath it a note blurred by rain. "I kept my promise. Now it's your turn to live." Scarlett held the flowers to her chest, tears mingling with the rain. Whether it was real or a trick of her heart, she didn't care. It was enough. The following spring, a stranger arrived in Carmel. A young man about 27 with gentle features and eyes the color of light through glass. Gray, unmistakably gray. He came to Scarlett's clinic saying he'd injured his shoulder. She treated him carefully, then asked, "Where are you from, New York?" he said. "I'm searching for someone." "A loved one?" "No, someone I've never met but who shares my name." Scarlett's hand stilled. "Your name, Jackson," he replied. Her heart skipped a beat. "Anthony Jackson." He smiled. "Yes, he was my father. I found papers my mother left before she died. She said he might have lived once somewhere in California." Scarlett froze. "What's your name, son?" "Elias." "Elias Jackson." The name fell like a whisper from destiny itself. She looked at him closely, the same steady gaze, the same quiet strength, the same soul she had once loved. Her voice trembled. "Elias, what was your mother's name? Hannah?" "Hannah Cole. She worked as a nurse at my father's hospital in Boston." Scarlett nodded faintly, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. "So, he kept his promise. Even if he couldn't stay with me, he still left the best part of himself behind." "You knew him?" Elias asked softly. "I didn't just know him," she whispered. "He was everything." He reached into his coat pocket. "Then I think my father meant for you to have this." He handed her a small wooden box worn smooth with age. I found it in an old house outside Nevada where he lived for a while. Your name was carved on it. Scarlett's fingers shook. The engraving was faint but unmistakable to Scarlett. Inside lay a folded letter. Scarlett, if you are reading this, I've gone farther than anyone can follow. I once thought our love was wrong, born in darkness, surrounded by lies and guilt. But you made me believe that even the cursed can be worthy of love. I don't know if we'll ever meet again. But if this reaches you, promise me one thing, smile. Because then I'll know you're still alive. Don't cry for me, Scarlett. Just be happy, and I'll have lived twice. Scarlett pressed the letter to her chest. A gentle wind drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of sea salt and roses. Elias said softly, "Maybe he wanted you to have the goodbye you never got." She shook her head, smiling through tears. "No, we don't need goodbyes. We only took a different road." Elias stayed in Carmel. He helped Scarlett with the clinic, repaired the flower garden, and filled the house with quiet laughter. He was kind, thoughtful, and his smile carried the same light Anthony once had. As they worked together, memories resurfaced. Anthony planting the first white rose, his rough hands in the soil, his low voice beneath the morning sun. One afternoon, Elias asked gently, "Do you ever regret it loving him?" Scarlett looked toward the horizon, where the sea kissed the sky. She said softly that regret only belongs to those who loved the wrong person. "I loved the right man, only at the wrong time." Elias was silent for a moment, then murmured, "If my father were alive, he'd be proud of you." Scarlett smiled faintly. "He doesn't need to be proud. Knowing I forgave him is enough." When the roses bloomed again that spring, a telegram arrived from New York. It bore only one short message signed DM. David Myers. Anthony's old confidant Anthony was buried in secret in the western Nevada hills. His wish, no headstone, only white roses. "If you wish to come, I'll be waiting." Scarlett folded the telegram and gazed out at the garden. Elias was outside watering the roses. Sunlight gilding his shoulders for a fleeting second, she thought she saw Anthony's shadow there. That afternoon she packed her bag. The Nevada hills were barren and dry, the air thick with sand and silence. Under a lone tree, a small garden bloomed white roses, vibrant against the red earth, defying the desolation. Scarlett knelt, pressing her hand to the soil. "Anthony, I'm here." The wind stirred, scattering petals around her. Sunlight shimmered through her tears, turning them into diamonds. Her voice trembled, but steady. "You were right, love doesn't need forgiveness. It only needs to be believed. And you, Anthony Jackson, are my proof." A single rose petal landed in her palm. She closed her hand around it and smiled. When Scarlett returned to Carmel, Elias was waiting on the porch. "You found him, didn't you?" She nodded gently. "Yes, but not with my eyes, with my heart." He smiled. "I'll stay here. Carmel needs a younger doctor, and someone to keep the garden alive." Scarlett looked at him, her eyes soft with pride. "If you stay, Anthony will smile wherever he is." "Then I'll stay," Elias said. That evening, as the sun dipped into the Pacific, the garden glowed red and gold. Scarlett sat by the window, penning the last page of her journal. "They say love is a moment. But for me, it was a lifetime. And if someone reads this after I'm gone, let them know even in chaos, a kind of love exists strong enough to make us better. Even if it's born from darkness." She set the pen down and looked outside. Elias was watering the roses, and the wind lifted the petals into a slow, swirling dance around him. Scarlett smiled a peaceful, knowing smile of someone who had finally found rest. And far beyond, across the fading horizon, it seemed like someone smiled back, a man with gray eyes standing in the mist, watching the white roses bloom once more. Because some loves are not meant to last a lifetime, they are meant to live forever in the hearts of two souls who loved deeply enough to become eternal. 6 months after Scarlett returned from Nevada, Carmel by the Sea seemed to awaken into a new season, not just of sea and sunlight, but of quiet rebirth. The breeze from the Pacific carried the mingled scents of salt and white roses, filling the garden with a tender kind of life. Her small clinic had become more than a place for healing the body. It was a refuge for hearts still learning to mend. Elias Jackson, the young man with gray eyes and a calm, unspoken gentleness, still lived there. He worked with steady patience, learning to dress wounds to listen to those who grieved. Sometimes his gaze would drift to the old photograph hanging in Scarlett's living room. A man in a dark suit standing beneath the lights of long-ago Chicago eyes, deep and unreadable. Each time Scarlett would smile without a word. She knew Elias wasn't just looking at a photograph, he was seeing a reflection of himself, the echo of a father he had never met. One misty autumn morning, before the fog had lifted, Elias came down the stairs holding a faded envelope. "Dr. Scarlett, I found this in the attic inside the wooden chest Anthony left. It's sealed, and it looks like no one ever opened it." Scarlett set down her teacup, her fingers trembling slightly as she took it. The paper was yellowed, the rewax seal still intact, and it was engraved with 2 letters. AJ. Her heart tightened. After all these years, she had believed she'd read every word he'd ever left behind. But fate always seemed to hide the last pieces of truth in the quietest places. She broke the seal carefully. Inside were 2 sheets, 1 letter, and what looked like a spiritual will, not of property, but of the soul. Scarlett. If you found this, it means Elias has reached you. Tell our son what I never dared to say while I lived, that I never believed in heaven until I met you. I walked through darkness my entire life, but you showed me that light isn't found in the sky inside the heart of someone who loves without fear. If you ever forget how to love, reread this and know that I am still with you in every grain of sand, every breaking wave, and in the eyes of the man who carries our blood. The letter ended with 3 words slanted, hurried, as if written in his final breath. I'm still here. Scarlett folded the paper slowly, her chest rising with a breath that trembled between pain and peace. Elias stood in silence, eyes bright with something wordless. How much did you love my father? He asked softly. Scarlett looked at him, her gaze deep, steady, tender. Enough to forgive everything, and enough to keep living the part of life he couldn't. Elias lowered his head, tears falling quietly. Perhaps he had never truly understood love until that moment, watching a woman still loving a man who was long gone with the serenity of one who had already made peace with eternity. That winter, Carmel grew colder than usual. The tides rose higher, clouds hung heavier, and the wind carried whispers of memory. Scarlett could feel her body weakening. The old heart condition she'd managed for years had begun its quiet countdown. One evening, she called Elias into her room. From the bedside table, she handed him a worn red leather journal. This, she said softly, is our story. If one day you ever feel it should be told, tell it with your heart, not your pen. Don't embellish it, don't hide it. True love doesn't fear the truth. Elias clutched the journal, his voice barely a whisper. I promise. Scarlett smiled, faint, fragile, but radiant, like a candle burning at the end of a long night. He'd be proud of you. A few days later, snow fell over Carmel, the first of the season, thin and silver against the sea air. Scarlett sat by the window in her old armchair as the last light of dusk spilled across the floor. She held the silver ring she had never taken off Anthony's ring. The ocean wind slipped through the crack in the window, carrying the scent of white roses. A single petal drifted onto her lap, pure and weightless as breath. Anthony, she whispered, her voice barely sounding. I'm coming home. Outside, Elias was tending the garden when he looked up and saw something he would never forget. A shimmer pale as mist rose from the window and drifted toward the sea, dissolving into the burning horizon. Scarlett was smiling. There was no pain, no fear, only the peace of someone who had finished a long, beautiful journey. Elias laid her ashes in the rose garden, the same place where she had once laughed, wept, and written the final lines of her story. There was no date on the gravestone. Only one sentence, Scarlett White, the woman who taught the darkness how to love. Years passed. Elias continued her work. The small clinic grew into a foundation, the Jackson Foundation for Hope, dedicated to bringing light to those without hope. His life's mission was the legacy of 2 souls who had found redemption through love. There were always 2 things on his desk, a photograph of Anthony and Scarlett, standing in the rose garden and the red leather journal. One quiet afternoon, Elias opened the journal again. On the final page in handwriting, he didn't recognize words that hadn't been there before a message waited. If you've found this, tell our story. Not so that people pity us, but they'll believe that real love can exist even in what's broken. And if you are the one reading this, don't be afraid to love or to lose. Love deeply, even if it costs you everything. Because only those who love without measure truly know what it means to live. That evening, Elias stood in the rose garden facing the sea. The air carried the scent of salt and flowers. The waves kept their timeless rhythm. He smiled gentle and specific. I told your story, Father, Mother, and I believe now some loves don't need proof. They're already written across the sky. 5 years later, a book titled The Man Who Came from the Shadows was quietly published under no name. It became an international phenomenon that broke hearts and mended them again. Readers said it wasn't just a story of love, but of redemption, forgiveness, and faith proof that a white rose can still bloom even amid cruelty. No one knew who wrote it. But in the final acknowledgments, there was only one line for Anthony Jackson in Scarlet White, who taught me that love never dies. The following spring, a young woman moved into the old seaside house in Carmel. She had hair the color of sunlight and eyes of soft gray Elias's daughter. She reopened the garden planting rows of white roses. When asked why she chose only that color, she smiled and said, "Because white is the color of souls brave enough to love without fear." That night, beneath a full moon, the girl stood by the window listening to the waves. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a voice seemed to drift on the wind, deep, warm, distant. I'm still here, Scarlet. The breeze stirred the roses gently, and everything was still for one timeless heartbeat, as if love had crossed the boundary between life and eternity. If you love dramatic romance stories like this, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a comment below so you won't miss the following exciting chapters.